This is Boom Bust, broadcasting around the world from Washington, D.C. I'm Bart Chilton, and thank you for being on board. Today, Bartlett Naylor, public citizen, is back, and we look at the case surrounding Congressman Chris Collins, who, as we reported yesterday, was charged by federal prosecutors with insider trading and lying to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Plus, there's a new opponent to President Trump's nominee to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and it might surprise you. We'll ask Bartlett about that. And in a bizarre twist to a story we've been covering for months, the Sinclair and Tribune media groups have terminated their multi-billion-dollar merger, and they are headed to court. Host of The Big Picture, Holland Cooke, weighs in on the circuitous turn of events. And RT's Trinity Chavez, who has reported on coffee companies for us in the past, takes a look at coffee crops and the importance of coffee to various economies. Plus, there's tons of cryptocurrency news, including allegations of market manipulation. Crypto expert Christy I is back in studio to help us understand the details. All that's coming up, but first we start with this. It's another day, and we notch another blow in the ongoing trade war. This time, China and the United States are at it again, exchanging fire with a new round of tariffs. On Tuesday night, the U.S. set in motion a 25% tariff on $16 billion worth of Chinese imports that will take effect on August 23rd. On Wednesday, China took reciprocal action, levying the same percentage duty on the same value of U.S. imports to China, also taking effect on the 23rd. And China will impact a number of the action by China will impact a number of U.S. companies that deal in chemicals and heavy manufacturing items, including those strategically targeted motorcycles that we've mentioned previously. The famed Harley-Davidson company has a large plant in the state of Wisconsin, which President Trump carried in 2016, and the company has notably opposed the Trump tariffs. While behind-the-scenes discussions are reportedly aimed at resolving the tariff tangle, the political risk for Mr. Trump may be increasing. Business Insider noted that Census Bureau figures show that China is the largest trading partner of 23 U.S. states. Mr. Trump, incidentally, carried 15 of those states. And yesterday, we reported on current Congressman Chris Collins, a Republican from New York, who was arrested and charged by federal prosecutors with insider trading and lying to the FBI. The congressman allegedly conveyed non-public information, that's a legal term of art, non-public information, about Innate Immunotherapeutics, an Australian pharmaceutical firm in which he is the principal shareholder, to his son, who then provided it to others to trade upon. Mr. Collins said he's not guilty. The congressman isn't known to a lot of people outside of the belly of the beast here in Washington. For the benefit of the background of all those boom busters out there, he was the first, not among the first, he was the first congressional Republican to endorse Donald Trump for president. Frankly, that's the first time I had learned of him, although he's only been in Congress since 2013. And prior to that, he was in business where he bought distressed companies and tried to turn them around. Certainly a laudable endeavor. One of the companies is Innate Immunotherapeutics. In January of last year, the consumer advocacy group Public Citizen asked Mr. Collins be investigated for insider trading. And with that as background on Mr. Collins, here to discuss is our friend Bartlett Naylor, the financial policy advocate at the aforementioned Public Citizen. Bartlett, welcome. We love having you on the show all the time. How did you guys get involved in this, and are you surprised by the turn of events?
Unfortunately, not surprised. Public Citizen has been promoting reform with respect to members of Congress buying stock, especially where they are overseeing the very industries where those stocks are positioned. And we pushed for passage of the Stock Act, which clarifies that illegal insider trading applies to members of Congress and requires reporting. We published a report, it was authored by Dr. Craig Holman, that showed that the Stock Act has led to a decline in trading, but we made two observations. Two members of Congress seem to be very active, Tom Price and Mr. Collins. And
Tom Price, the former member of Congress, and then the Secretary of Health and Human Service, who left amidst some sort of scandal.
A few issues arose with Mr. Price. And we asked Congress and the Securities and Exchange Commission to look into that. And on June 5th of 2017, they actually interviewed Mr. Collins, and it was 17 days later that he got an email from Innate that they had failed a trial drug experiment, leading him to spend about 14 minutes before he decided to call his son, 7 separate times before the call went through, and the son then unloaded the stock after 17 or so different trades the following day.
I was reading a story about it. He was actually at a in the Rose Garden at the White House and got this call. And then, as you say, 14 minutes before he actually decided to allegedly break the law?
Yeah, I think it's actually it's 16 minutes. At 6:55, he gets an email, and then you can see him on the telephone. It's actually on video because the White House picnic was well covered by lots of people. And it was 16 minutes later that he makes the first of a series of phone calls because they don't go through. And then finally, about 4 or 5 minutes later, one goes through and he speaks for 6 minutes with his son.
And when this announcement did become public, I think the stock crashed like 92%. I mean, it really took a dive. So he was not charged with this, I'll apologize to our boom busters, 10b-5, which is the market manipulation under the Securities and Exchange Act. But he did violate law with regard to insider trading by simply passing along this information to his son, who then gave it to others, including his fiancée.
Fiance's father, and the indictment describes about 6 different co-conspirators. Some named, some unnamed.
Now, look, Republicans and Democrats alike have been doing this sort of stuff and trading, and I thought that the Stock Act, which was, 2012 perhaps, was going to take care of it, but that doesn't seem to have had a significant impact, right? Well,
I think it's had an impact. Again, trading is down, as we've documented in this report by
Trading by members of Congress is down, because there was this old Congressional Research Service report that from 2010 or 2011 that showed that actually members of Congress, their portfolio beat the market. Well, who wouldn't like that? Well, they had inside information.
Yeah, the report you referenced seemed to do 25% better than the average person, and obviously they're well positioned to actually oversee the policy that affects it. The Stock Act did not. It fell short in barring members of Congress from owning stock, especially where they have oversight. It did lead to disclosure. That's an advance. It also failed to prohibit ownership of companies that are actually in the business of gaining political intelligence from these companies that would actually affect the stock price of these companies. And again, members of Congress should not be in the business of trading stock at all, particularly where they oversee the companies.
No way, no how. Before we leave, Bart, I want to talk about Kathy Kraninger, who is nominated to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau by President Trump. And there's an unlikely opponent there in an op-ed yesterday by the editors of the USA Today, which I was sort of surprised. I mean, I don't recall USA Today being like really out there on presidential nominees, but did this surprise you? And I know last time we spoke, you guys hadn't taken a position. Have you so far?
We formally opposed the nomination, and as USA Today's editorial board points out, she lacks any qualification. Would you go to a surgeon that didn't go to a medical school? Would you get your car fixed by somebody who's never repaired a car? That's what Kraninger presents. She has never overseen a bank regulatory agency, has never advocated on behalf of consumers. She simply lacks the experience. And in the Senate testimony, she was invited to explain her role at the Office of Management and Budget on the zero tolerance, the child caging policy, and she would not. Wide latitude to do that. Melania Trump, everybody opposes child caging, but she declined to do that. So we don't think she brings the right sensitivity, as well as it's clear, as USA Today pointed out, she lacks any experience whatsoever.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about this. This is a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, not the Financial Sector Protection Bureau. And you all do such a good job of being out there and making sure that average consumers are heard and their voices are loud and clear. Thank you, Bartlett Naylor. Really appreciate you always being here.
Thank you.
The anticipated $24 billion wedding is off between drugstore chain Rite Aid and Albertsons grocery stores, and there are definitely some bad feelings in the aftermath. Rite Aid leadership reportedly soured on the proposed acquisition of Albertsons, which we first reported back in February, under pressure from stockholders. The cancellation, announced by both corporations and on Wednesday, mooted a vote scheduled for today, and Rite Aid stock fell as much as 10% during today's trading. Rite Aid stockholders balked at the proposed merger formula for trading out their shares, likely influenced by negative input from investment advisory consultants, and Albertsons stood firm on their terms, leading to the mutual cancellation. The way forward is unclear for both companies, as both the drugstore and the grocery sectors are in transition, with big players from other sectors crowding in the field and a rush to develop new delivery technologies. And meanwhile, the chief executive officer of Rite Aid's biggest rival, that's CVS, has plunged into the brewing debate about drug prices. More specifically, CEO Larry Merlo sought to attribute high drug prices that had angered and killed, actually, consumers to drug manufacturers rather than pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. CVS owns one of the largest, biggest PBMs, Caremark. In theory, PBMs mediate between drug makers, pharmacies, employers, and insurance plans in order to shake out savings and pocket a portion of what they find. Their role was enhanced by the Affordable Care Act, but in recent years, PBMs have been criticized by some as profit-taking middlemen. CEO Merlo said the real culprit in the steadily rising prices for life-saving drugs are not PBMs, but manufacturer rebates. Mr. Merlo told reporters on an earnings call yesterday that our data showed that the list price for increasing faster for drugs with smaller rebates than it is for medications with substantial rebates. CVS's second quarter revenue was reported at $46.7 billion, with $33 billion in revenue from Caremark, their PBM subsidiary. Caremark revenue was up 2.68%, outpacing 2.2% overall growth in CVS revenue. And breaking news today, we've spoken before about the Sinclair Broadcast Group, which made local anchors echo some silly script about being independent. You may recall it.
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased
And then Sinclair sought to merge for $3.9 billion with Tribune Media, although the U.S. Federal Communications Commission chairman had referred the matter to an administrative law judge for consideration. Well, now the deal has been called off and the parties are in litigation. Here to look at the details is RT America's own Holland Cooke, the host of The Big Picture. Holland, you've been following this for months with us. We appreciate it. What do you think? I mean, it was a weird story to begin with, right? Now it's become even more strange.
This is a story about hubris, a term defined from Greek tragedy, meaning excessive pride toward or defiance of the gods, leading to nemesis. And you have covered here on Boom Bust all three acts in this particular tragedy. The first was that mosaic, and how naive could Sinclair, a TV company, have been not to think somebody would mash up all those promos, betraying the fact that these local anchors were really just taking orders from headquarters. Act two, you alluded to FCC Chairman Ajit Pai, who himself is under investigation for paving the way for this merger by deregulating, in some cases, very arcane FCC rules that seem tailor-made for this. And Pai has embarrassed himself with some snarky videos about net neutrality. Again, an overstep. He was getting death threats for a while.
They're really criticized for the net neutrality thing that they did,
He and his
right?
family have been under federal protection, so he's dialing it back and kicked it to that administrative law judge to duck. And Act 3 in the hubris was Sinclair had to spin off some stations. It was 170 of theirs plus 42 from Tribune, so they couldn't keep them all. And you're supposed to sell these stations at market value to entities which are at arm's length. One example, WGN-TV, Chicago.
They proposed flagship station there.
Iconic station, Channel 9, Chicago. They proposed it to sell it to one Stephen Fader for $60 million. Not a typo. Radio stations in Chicago sell for $60 million. And guess who? Stephen Fader and Sinclair chairman David Smith both sit on the board of a car dealership. So that just didn't pass the smell test. And now Tribune is suing Sinclair for $1 billion, 1/4 of what the deal is worth, because their stock price is going to take a whack.
It's crazy. We've just got about 30 seconds left, Holland. But, you know, this new entity was going to be get to about 70% of the households across the country with pretty much conservative viewers, conservative broadcasts, rather, competing with Fox. Will somebody pick up this mantle and try to compete with Fox? What do you think?
Whether or not they try to become the new Fox righty channel, Tribune is likely going to be in play. We're hearing of various other TV groups who would like to have a look at that prepared portfolio, and I don't think you've heard the last of them in another proposed merger.
Holland Cooke, host of The Big Picture. Thank you always, my friend. Sure appreciate it, Holland. And it's time now for a quick break, but hang here because when we return, RT's Trinity Chavez reports from New York on the economics of coffee. Plus, crypto expert Christy I is back in studio, and we'll get to a ton of crypto and blockchain news to consider. And as we go to break, here are the numbers at the closing bell. Bitcoin in a rally over the past 20 hours, up more than 3% as we went to air. We'll be back in a flash.
The feeling of freedom. Everyone in the world should experience freedom, and you get it on the open road. The world according to Jesse. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride.
The mainstream media, swarming with falsehoods, riddled with censorship and under corporate control, is incapable of truly informing its audience. It can't rise above the corrupt motives of those calling the shots. When you awaken to this fact, turn to RT America, where we dare to question more.
Pakistan's economy remains in poor condition despite $2.41 billion worth of foreign investment in the nation last year. Well, now the incoming president, or prime minister rather, of Pakistan, celebrity athlete Imran Khan, appears set to make a major choice on economic policy by accepting a $4 billion credit package from a bank based in Saudi Arabia. Pakistani officials told the Financial Times of London that, quote, the paperwork is all in place for a credit offer from Saudi-backed Islamic Development Bank to be extended after Mr. Khan takes office on Sunday, August 11th. Pakistani officials reportedly expect Finance Minister Asad Umar to accept, if not rubber stamp, in order to stem the depletion of foreign exchange reserves. The package is seen as helpful but not sufficient to address Pakistan's pending financial challenges. Pakistan's foreign exchange problem is the most immediate crisis facing the nation, as the nation's current accounts deficit is running at $2 billion a month. And we now move to New York, where RT's Trinity Chavez looks at the economics of coffee.
Coffee, the first thing many of us think about in the morning. Thank you. And what most of us need to get through our days. But coffee isn't just powering up our work days, it's also fueling economies all around the world, one cup of joe at a time.
It's definitely the first thing I drink, and it's constantly a part of my breakfast every day that I'm working.
Coffee, it's the most consumed beverage in the United States, even more than tap water. So it's no wonder why the coffee industry impacts economies all around the world. There are two types of economically important varieties of the coffee plant, which are Arabica and Robusta.
I feel tired without it. I feel like I need it to feel normal.
60% of the coffee produced worldwide is Arabica, while 40% is Robusta. Around 70 countries currently produce coffee, with most of the supply coming from the developing countries of Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Indonesia, and Ethiopia. In 2014, Brazil produced a staggering 2.7 million metric tons of coffee. That's more than 30% of the world's production. There are some 300,000 plantations that are spread over more than 10,000 square miles of Brazilian landscape. Coffee continues to be the driving force behind the economic development of Brazil. And while Vietnam is relatively new to the international coffee trade, the country has quickly become one of the largest producers. Second to Brazil, and since the 1990s, coffee production has increased every year by 20 to 30%. In 2014, the country produced 1.65 million metric tons of coffee, while Colombia produced 696,000 metric tons in 2014, followed by Indonesia with 411,000 metric tons, and Ethiopia with a production of 390,000 metric tons. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., the number of people who drink coffee is at its highest level since 2012.
I sell over 100 coffees in 5 hours.
According to a recent survey commissioned by the National Association of Coffee, over $225 billion was spent on coffee in 2015, and coffee drinkers spent a whopping $74 billion on coffee that same year. The association found that the industry employs around 1.7 million jobs in the U.S. and generates about $28 billion in taxes. However, the Intercontinental Exchange shows that coffee futures have dropped in recent years. In November 2016, futures were being bought at over $190, but today prices are down to only $106.70. But those numbers don't seem to be slowing business at coffee shops.
I buy at least 2 cups of coffee a day. As much as you need it to function, it's also become like a social thing.
According to reports, Tim Hortons Coffee House takes first place as the largest coffee chain in the world, with an annual turnover of more than $3.2 billion, more than 4,000 coffee chains worldwide, and has more than 100,000 employees. Other popular coffee chains like Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts taking the 8th and 9th spots. And tech is one of the driving factors behind the high demand of coffee. And according to a recent report, around 10% of coffee users order their cup of joe on their smartphone. And then you could have your coffee within minutes. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
And we thank Trinity. There's distressing news regarding cryptocurrency prices, which may have been manipulated. The Wall Street Journal reports that a few crypto venture groups are accountable for manipulating markets and gaining profits of roughly $825 million in the first half of this year alone. One particular crypto called Cloak Coin, a relatively older altcoin, is said to be totally unconnected to the price of Bitcoin, which lends some credence to concerns about price manipulation. And here to discuss this and other hot crypto and blockchain news is crypto expert and former banker Christy I, who is the co-founder and managing partner of Counterpart X. Christy, thank you so much for being here. I've been looking forward to talking to you about these things. What do you make of this particular Cloak Coin? I mean, I'd heard of it, but when you say that it's really disconnected from the price of Bitcoin, everything is sort of connected to Bitcoin a little bit. It does add some credence, in my view, to this charge of manipulation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so Cloak Coin was actually one of 121 coins that is believed to be involved in market manipulation, specifically pump and dump, where a group of trading syndicates actually formed to pump the price of this Cloak Coin and drive it up, while the prices of all the other Bitcoin trading pairs were actually relatively unchanged during this time span. The time window for this pump was actually only 2 minutes, where the Cloak Coin actually rose dramatically 50% on Binance, and while none of the other coins changed. And while similarly, after 2 minutes was over, all the traders released and liquidated their positions at a profit and dumped Cloak Coin, driving it to the ground. So this is known as pump and dump, which is actually quite pervasive in the cryptocurrency market landscape. And it's actually very reminiscent of the early days of the stock exchange, where penny stocks were similarly manipulated and pumped and dumped also as well. And so the stock market actually matured over the years, and we think that the same will come to the cryptocurrency market as well. And we think that regulation and reform will come to protect all of the retail traders.
Very interesting. And, the price of Bitcoin over the last year has, plummeted, as we've talked about. But I remember last year, about this time, and I don't know exactly the order, but there was Jamie Dimon saying that Bitcoin was going to be short-lived. There was Russian President Putin saying that it was a pyramid scheme. There was all this negative news. And I remember that it took $600 or $800 drop at that time. And I thought, well, that makes sense. Yeah. But then it went up. And I thought, my former regulatory role, I'm like, there's got to be something going on here. I mean, somebody is pumping. Whether or not they were dumping, I didn't know. But in my old role, I would have been calling the investigators up to say, what's going on? Let's find this stuff. So I'm pretty glad that they've gone ahead and they're at least looking at it. You know, as we've talked about before, all these hacks are a problem. We spent a whole segment talking about it. Boy, price manipulation. You always want people to be careful with their investments. It's their hard-earned money. And cryptos seem so cool and edgy and everything, and they are. They're the future of money, in my view. But you got to be careful, particularly when you see, you know, triple-digit price swings, right?
Absolutely, and this is the case with all of these altcoins. And we mentioned this last time on this segment, that altcoins, all these smaller coins with a market cap below 5 million, they're very susceptible to being manipulated because they don't have a wide distribution. Not many people own them, so therefore a large group of traders can easily take control of them and manipulate the price. And this can come in the form of a pump and dump attack, like we saw here with Cloakcoin, or it can also come in the form of a 51% attack where your entire wallet can potentially be emptied. And so I know a lot of people are very excited about the potential of altcoins, but it's very important to keep in mind to not get caught up in the get-rich-quick promise of altcoins, because everybody thinks that this cheap coin can become the next Bitcoin in the future, and most likely it won't. And that's like the same story with all the penny stocks that everybody got sucked into.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes without saying, but when there's, but I'll say it anyway, you know, when there's light liquidity, when there's not a lot of trading, just a couple of trades can really move prices up or down. You know, there's a new Yale study out by economists, and they've said, look, Bitcoin is different. It's different in a number of reasons. From stocks and futures, etc. And the paper just out today actually talks about how, you know, maybe that's an important reason why we shouldn't expect Bitcoin to be so old school in trading. What are your thoughts?
I think it's very cool that this paper came out recently, because a survey that came out last month actually said that institutional investors are sitting on the sidelines right now because they have very low confidence in predicting the price movements of cryptocurrency. They don't know what really drives it. So it's very interesting that this paper recently came out. And so this paper attempts to investigate the potential predictors of the price movements and returns of cryptocurrency. And they isolated two factors. Two key factors that they found was the momentum effect and the investor attention effect. The momentum is very similar to that of the stock market, in which particularly the technology and biotech sector, where if there's a dramatic increase in Bitcoin one week, it is very likely that the next week that velocity will also continue. And we've kind of seen that because momentum is driven by hype and FOMO and fear of missing out, etc. And so that is actually very likely. The second factor that she highlighted was the investor attention effect, where they said that the interest and hype that is measured by the number of queries and the number of posts and Google searches on the internet was actually very correlated to the pricing effect of Bitcoin in the subsequent 1 to 2 weeks.
Super interesting, Christy. We never have enough time to get to all of it. Christy I, crypto expert, Counterparty X, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And that's it for this time. You can catch Boom Bust on DirecTV channel 321, Dish Network channel 280, or streaming 24/7 on Pluto TV. That's the free TV app, channel 132. Or as always, hit us up at youtube.com/BoomBustRT. We'll catch you again next time.